After independence from Britain in 1947, India combined the British lifestyle with its own traditions. On the macro level, the education system and the British language have been well incorporated into the Indian culture, but also several Indian languages and dialects still dominate. Socially, many Indians have followed both Western and traditional musics and clothing styles. For the most part, the late 1900s were the properest time in India since it marked itself as a third world country opting out of the Cold War. Instead, the country focused more on educating the youth and rebuilding the social pyramid with a growing middle class.
I was born in a small town in India, in north of India. My parents were there at that time, and my dad was posted there. We were a typical middle class family. My dad, he was a civil engineer, and he worked for the government water supplies department. So he actually retired as a chief engineer with that department. But he was a very honest and upright officer. So we were a good family. I had two elder sisters. I was the youngest one. My mom was a homemaker, and we had some good time. I have a lot of good memories of my childhood.
Migration grew rapidly in India during the 1960s and 70s because of the introduction of trains and airplanes. The middle class also had jobs that required them to move a lot around in the nation, whereas the farmers had a rudimentary life.
Yeah, we did move around a lot. I mean, we used to move practically every 2 to 3 years because my dad had a transferable job, so he used to move from one place to other, and he always made it a point of taking the family along. So we were always together, and that made a big difference, in my upbringing. So I kind of never missed my dad being around, and that made a big difference to my life. When I see all the younger folks who have challenges in terms of either of their parents not being with them, I feel myself fortunate enough that my both my parents were always with me as I was growing up.
Family values have always been part of the Indian tradition. In the 70s, divorce was a taboo in the society, whereas today it's very common. The family structures were very simple in India, with the man working, the woman taking care of the house, and the kids going to school.
So I grew up in India, and the family values in India are pretty strong, pretty similar to what we see in US, with one remarkable difference that there are very few broken families in India. So even now the divorce rate is less than 1%, and that, I would say, makes a big difference because kids, when they grow up, they don't have the risk of growing up in broken families. And you know, although my mom was a homemaker, she always took a lot of interest in our upbringing and also in our education. And of course, my dad, because he was an engineering graduate, which was a big thing in India, so he also used to put a lot of focus on our studies. So that made a big difference. All three of us, um, we were always taught to, focus much more on our education, and always the studies came first, and that's the way we grew up. And I would say that was, I kind of grew up in 70s and 80s, and in India, especially even now, I would say there is a lot of focus on how well you are educated, because education is the most important thing in life, and that kept me in good stead, and that's why I'm here, where in this position now.
Even with a growing middle class, India suffered from poverty because of its massive population of over half a billion in the 70s. The majority didn't have enough for basic needs such as electricity, shelter, and food.
So India is always called a land of paradox to an outsider. Um, there seems to be a lot of poverty in India, and especially in 70s. when the nation was still coming out of big wars which were there in 65 and 71. The quality of life wasn't that high. But India always had three levels of strata, I would say, in the society. One who was thinking rich, who had so much of money they didn't know how to spend, and then the average middle class, and then the poor people who didn't even have enough to eat twice a day. So I was very fortunate enough to be part of the growing middle class, and I would say that is still the biggest strength of the country right now. Um, uh, if I compare with US, I would say the cost of living was much lower over there, and because the way I was growing up, the aspiration level was also not that high. So there was very high degree of contentment in whatever we were doing. In terms of quality of life, I would say I had possibly the best quality of life because 70s was a very quiet time. No cell phones. We till 76 we didn't even have a telephone at our home. So the only thing that we had was a radio, and that made a big difference in terms of we were able to focus a lot on our studies. I used to study 4 to 5 hours a day after coming back from school, and used to go out, play sports like cricket and badminton, which were typical Asian sports over there. So I would say that helped me a lot in having a very high quality of life. Like I said, the average Indian middle class, although they don't have so much of money, but they never really compromise on these needs. When we talk about the Maslow's need hierarchy, I would say all the basic needs were always met. Uh, we used to have, we used to actually live in pretty good houses given by the government because my dad was a government servant, and we always had a vehicle as well with us, which was kind of rarity in India at that time. So um, my dad always had a official car, and we were allowed to use it for personal requirements as well. So I never really found any kind of scarcity. Although, like I said earlier, since my dad was a very honest and upright officer, um, we did not have those kind of monies that you sometimes expect from a very senior government officer. But we used to live well within our means, and honestly, when I look back, I have no regrets. I think uh, my parents always told me, there is a saying we have that we should stretch our legs as much as you know the cover allows you. You should never go beyond your means. So from the day one, we learn to live well within our means. And I would say that's still the guiding principle of my life.
Education was a major concern in India, especially for the middle class. The British had left a well-structured curriculum, and India took advantage of that. Competition became more intense as the population grew, and the courses harder as time went on.
So one of the benefits India got was that it followed the British system. So Britishers, although they left in 1947, but they did leave back an extremely structured and I would